It's my pleasure to interview Tamara Jones, the founder of Holistic Design Group, a growth agency that guides startups through brand positioning, go to market strategies, product market fit, and capital readiness. Tamara has helped 21 brands, including her own, to raise an $18 million in pre-seed to Series A venture capital funding. That is wild. We're going to have to talk about that, Tamara. Her own entrepreneurial journey includes founding Made by Yoke. Have I pronounced that correctly, Tamara?
Yes, 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 all good.
That's all good. Okay. A CPG brand, that stands for anyone who isn't aware, that stands for consumer product good. A CPG brand that achieved placement in 25,000 retail stores, which is incredible within the first 3 years, driving year over year 7-figure growth. That is absolutely insane, Tamara. Prior to her entrepreneurial ventures, Tamara led product development at teams at Fortune 500 companies such as HBO, Sony, and Gap. Tamara's extensive experience spans across beauty, wellness, personal care industries. So, if any listeners are in those sectors, then this is the one for you. She's pivoted her beauty company through various niches, maintaining top selling brands and collaborating with major brands like Malin Goetz and Maharishi Ayurveda. Additionally, she has developed a beauty line for a boutique hotel chain in the US, handling branding, formulation, and package design as a consultant. Ladies and gentlemen, that deserves a huge round of applause. Can I get some emoji reactions on the chat there? Tamara, welcome to today's session. I have to say, that's probably one of the longest and most impressive bios I've ever read. So,
I was like, oh my God, this is why I'm so exhausted.
like, that's done. We're done. Thanks for coming. That's everything. That's great. Tamara, where do we start? I mean, I feel like we've got to start with Made by Yoke, your own brand. Talk to
Yeah.
us first of all. What's the brand in your own words?
Well, so the brand it sort of was like an accidental brand. I really wasn't like, oh, I want to be I want to make a beauty company. I was so burnt out from my career in New York that I basically like quit my job and I bought an around the world ticket. And I was just like, I just needed to breathe. I had spent like 11 years working 60-hour weeks. And that sort of journey led me to Australia, where I was studying yoga and meditation. But where I was living, they were serving Ayurvedic food, which a lifelong vegetarian, but like my vegetarian food never tasted this good. So I was like always in the kitchen asking questions. And it turned out that there was like an Ayurveda program that was starting in the area. And so they invited me to join. And I thought, oh, I'll just like maybe take a cooking class or whatever. Anyway, flash forward, I ended up staying for 3.5 years, became an Ayurveda practitioner, and learned about everything from herbs to food to lifestyle. And this brand came out of what I learned in that program. So I kind of completely transformed my life and started making products for my clients while I was living in Australia and sold them at a market. And somebody at the market had a bunch of spas in Sydney, and she was like, "Oh, this oil smells so good. Can I sell it in my spa?" And I was like, "I don't know. Like, is that a thing? How would I do that?" And that's literally how the brand started. So it was. I always say I'm kind of like an accidental entrepreneur. I kind of just was trying to find myself, to be honest, and then stumbled onto something that I realized I really cared about. And then from that, I came back to the States and did the same thing. I went to farmers markets and I went to like thrift markets in LA and met a buyer from Urban Outfitters. And that's literally how I got off the ground. And so I would say the early dates were kind of accidental, but everything I did after that was very, very specific and very strategic. But
Tamara, what a wonderful origin story. That is incredible. So what I have to ask you about is we've gone
yeah,
from the initial idea on your travels, and I have to say, I've come across this wonderful story, and this, to underscore for the other entrepreneurs listening here as well. I've heard these wonderful stories of how someone's gone off traveling and they've physically gone off somewhere else, they've discovered something new. It's the origin story of a lot of famous brands that we know today, and then they kind of brought it back. So, between that, you going to Australia to being in 25,000 retail stores, I have to ask, in those early days, was there
yeah.
any product iteration involved at all? Did you have to do any pivoting testing? to get that product market fit before you scaled, or did you kind of get it right bullseye first time?
I think two things were going on. I think, yes, I was constantly pivoting product. I was constantly making and testing. It was like an insane laboratory of turning stuff around to see what fit, which is partly why self manufacturing made a lot of sense. So I self manufactured and built in my own manufacturing facility that I ran for 4 years. Because I had that flexibility, it allowed me to constantly respond to the market. I think it's a lot harder to respond as quickly as I did when you're like purchasing inventory. Do you know what I mean? So I was able to move so fast and furious because I was doing it myself. So that's one.
Can I
Two is
just clarify, when you say self-manufacturing, is that a fancy way of saying doing it in your own kitchen, or does that
well,
mean
I
something?
started in my kitchen. I started in my kitchen and I took everything from my kitchen to a trade show, to a New York trade show. I basically followed brands that were similar to what I wanted to be and that were being sold in stores that I thought I would basically sit well with at retail. And so I basically saw, oh, this brand goes to this trade show. I'm going to go to that trade show. So the biggest investment that I made in the early days was I invested in a booth at a trade show. And that's where I met my sort of first round of buyers, if you will. And I took like something like 40 products to the trade show because I didn't know what I was doing. Like I didn't need 40 products. But what it gave me was an opportunity to sort of like market test immediately all the ideas that I had. And so you could see very quickly what products buyers were being drawn to. And you could see sort of products that nobody paid attention to. And so that gave me my first understanding of like what this buyer who I knew my what I thought was my customer better than I did because they had all the market data. They were already selling to them. So I leveraged what I learned from those buyers and what they were into. I knew, okay, that means that my customer would be into that product. And so I basically took that kind of like reverse market data, and that's how I determined product market fit.
That's so interesting. I was literally just about to comment on interesting that you essentially market tested with buyers as
Yeah.
opposed to the end user. So I think there's a really great little pearl of wisdom there to just share with the rest is sometimes that there's maybe shortcuts. Maybe you don't have to go out there and speak to thousands of beauty users. If you speak to the buyers, they've actually got all the data and the understanding to help guide you. That's really interesting. Do you remember any specifics about that time with like what resonated, what didn't resonate, your biggest surprises?
I mean, I think probably the biggest surprise, honestly, was that I sold products at the trade show. I kind of was like, I just didn't know what to expect. You know what I mean? I was literally just like, I hope somebody buys it, but I don't think I realized. So this was the second thing I was going to say from before is that there was a big timing factor here for me, which is that, I started that company 14 years ago. So it was right at the time when a lot of Etsy people, there's had just started to sort of sell on their own websites. It was the first time that the beauty industry was waking up to clean products and clean ingredients. So a big part of it was that people were looking for that sort of DIY movement to sell in their stores. And so all of the buyers were trying to sort of like jump into that, what I call sort of that initial Etsy phase. So they were looking for people who were making stuff in their kitchen. They wanted to tell that story. And so half of it was I hit it at the right time, and then the other half, I think, of the success is that I then self-manufactured. So I was able to do what I call, which is basically manufacturing, like just-in-time manufacturing. So I was able to pivot every quarter, like just in response to what was doing well.
Yeah, that's amazing. So just on that last note, so initially started out in your kitchen.
Yeah.
Forgive me from outside the world of actually physically manufacturing products on the
Yeah.
self-manufacturing. Did it then was the natural graduation from your kitchen table then smaller warehouses in New York? Like what was that exactly?
So when I went to that first trade show I did in New York, we got picked up by Nordstrom, and it was still a small. Nordstrom is a major retailer in the U.S. It's kind of like a Harrods, I guess. And it was still small enough that I could hand do it, but it was too big for my kitchen. And so I basically hired a bunch of interns and I rented a warehouse space. I was living in Venice Beach in LA. I rented a warehouse space through a friend of a friend locally, and I just bought a bunch of like, like fold up tables and chairs. I had a bunch of people, interns, and then I also brought in two people that worked in kitchens because there's this whole like you have to like cleanliness factor of understanding how to like cleanly manufacture products. I trained everybody and we just started pouring oils and it was really crude and really rudimentary. It was like beakers and oils and like almost like these big vats where I was like mixing flowers and oils. I mean, it was literally just like a mess. I mean, it was insane. I had a cot in the warehouse and I basically would like sleep there. So I would sleep and then I would like wake up at 2 a.m. and like pour 200 oils and like go back just to fill
Wow.
this first Nordstrom order. I think it was like 5,000 units. But I mean, I hadn't really made more than like 30 units at that point, right?
Wow, that's so
It was
interesting.
chaos. It was total chaos. Like say this to say, like, this is not how I would tell somebody else to do it. This is just how it happened for me, right? I kind of
Yeah,
did
no, absolutely.
it over.
And this is, very very aligned to the podcast that I host as well, Strategy and Tragedy, which is what can we learn from other, like, this probably wasn't the best way to do it, but like how can we then help shortcut that for others? And of course, what we're doing here for the one day community. I've got so many questions, Tamara, so we've still got some time. This point in the journey where you've got a cot in your warehouse and you're
Yeah.
getting up at 2 a.m. to like hand fill another batch simply to fulfill that Nordstrom order. At this point in time, like, I presume that you hadn't quite got a handle on the unit economics at this point. Was
No.
it just kind of like, we need to just validate this one and then we'll sort out the financial models?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, really, because I got so many orders so fast, I really spent a year just trying to figure out how to fulfill orders properly.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of unit economics in it because suddenly I was sourcing wholesale bottles from China. Suddenly I was
Yeah.
sourcing essential oils from, 4 different places around the world. And so even though I wasn't strategically thinking about unit economics, I had to because just the volume of ingredients and supplies that I needed to meet these
Yeah.
orders. So once I got paid from that first Nordstrom order, that's when I was like, okay, I need to use this money and really figure this out and hire somebody to help me manage, whatever it is. And I will say that, I hired probably the wrong people right away because I wasn't totally sure what I needed. And I was like, oh my God, I was frankly desperate because I had so many orders. I just needed help. And
Yeah.
so I really was over my skis, right? And so I spent the first year just trying to fulfill. And then the second year is really when I realized that I needed to like step back and figure out what this was and how I was going to make money and how I was going to grow this.
Yeah, but I love how you get over your skis to begin with, and I don't think that that's a bad place at all. In fact, the opposite. I think every entrepreneur, like, you need to get out ahead of your skis,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
you can figure it out afterwards.
Yeah, and I think it made me really smart really quickly about 2 things that I didn't really have experience in. It made me get really clear about the complete like logistical operation of taking something from like ingredients to the right way to package it to ship it to a retailer. But it
Mm,
also made me understand really quickly that there were a lot of things that I personally didn't know how to do. And I needed to figure out who the right people were to help me because,
yeah,
I came from a tech background, I came from operations, but it wasn't manufacturing. And
yeah,
manufacturing, when you're self-manufacturing, you're basically I was running a manufacturing business and
yeah.
I was running a nuclear business. And that wasn't my background. And so I think getting over your skis, if you're self-aware, it helps you understand where your gaps are and where your blind spots are really quickly so that you can try to fill them.
Yeah. And as much as I've just said, we can learn from others, we can sort of, avoid the mistakes that we made before. There's definitely elements of what you've just described there in particular that you do need to go through to grow through. You
Yeah.
do need to, like, I just need an extra pair of hands. I just need to, like, fulfill this order. Like, you will figure it out afterwards. I just want to rewind to a tiny comment that you made before. You said about, fulfilling that Nordstrom order and you're like, once we got paid. Was that a lesson in there as well? Like, the financial terms of the deal, like, it sounded as though Nordstrom only paid you after you'd put in all the work. Is that normal, or could you change that afterwards?
Well, so, what happened was that we had a lot of boutique orders also. And so the boutique orders were kind of like paying the day to day because boutiques will pay you. Typically, the boutiques were offering to pay us at ship. And so I didn't even understand that, but I picked up on it quickly because on the trade show floor, people were handing me their credit card, right? So I was like, okay, you're paying at ship. When we went through the documentation for Nordstrom, it basically, they have, any major retailer is going to give you a book like 150 pages long about how you work with them. And so in that book, it says, we pay you 60 days after the inventory has been received. So I learned very quickly that a big retailer is going to pay you differently than, a boutique that's, in a trendy neighborhood. And so I had enough boutique orders to pay the day to day. And then that big chunk order for Nordstrom is what sort of like gave us that first initial like enough cash to be like, oh my God, I have money in the bank. I like feel like I can pay my rent this month without stressing out about how.
That's so interesting. I love those like practical specific lessons learned with like the bigger guys are more likely to dictate to you the way that they're going to work. In this case, it was 60 days upon receipt of inventory. So you've got to, as much as you've got to find that product market fit, what's that pain point you're solving, get out ahead of your skis. But as soon as you possibly can, you also need to have that sensible, like financial view on things to be like,
Yeah,
okay, like, how sustainable is this actually a business or is this a side passion project that's making me a bit of pocket money? Like they're two very different
yeah.
things.
Yeah, like, and then that was the first, after I got paid from Nordstrom is when I sat down and looked at the unit economics. Okay, so I realized there were vendors, there were suppliers that were too expensive. And I
Yeah.
started to realize, I need to be asking questions about and negotiating better rates with my suppliers. So I started just negotiating around the entire clock, right? So negotiating with suppliers, negotiating with retailers. And so the next big order that we got from a retailer was J. Crew. And so J. Crew wanted to pay 60 days. And I was like, I'm a new brand. Like, can you pay me in 30 days? And they said yes, right? And also, we got into shipping situations where I paid for the shipping with Nordstrom, but then I realized I was losing all this money on shipping. And so then I said to J. Crew, like, I'm a new brand. I can't afford to pay shipping. Can you pay shipping? So I just started to sort of softly negotiate everywhere I could when I realized that it's really hard to make money in a CPG brand. And it was
Mm.
because it was new, but as the years went by, I realized that it's a very cash capital intensive business. And it really comes down to inventory and how you manage your inventory. And also, obviously, like everything, your margin. And so these are sort of the small steps that walked me into the bigger understanding of what it means to be running a high inventory business.
So as we're approaching that side in the story, I love this because perfect segue when it comes to margins and making sure that you're operating a profitable business, there are two ways to do it. It's either lower your costs or up your growth somehow. So we talked about negotiating with suppliers, getting lower costs on the growth side of things, obviously ties with today's talk as well, growth and funding. So growth, you secured these partnerships with Nordstrom, J. Crew, phenomenal, Tamara. That's so, so cool. What do you think was the key lesson for you in securing that 25,000 like retail store placement? The top thing that worked?
I think the top thing that worked was honestly cultivating strong relationships with the buyers.
Yeah.
So the way, in the beginning, we just had an Excel spreadsheet. So every single buyer we met, and I had one intern who then became, obviously a very close friend, who then became a sales manager, head of sales, and she was with me the entire time I ran the company. At trade shows, we would write in the computer as soon as we met them, like we met Stephanie. Stephanie lives in Brooklyn, has a cat, and likes the scent, right? So
Love
we would
that.
write like personal stories about you so we could go back and follow up with something personal. And then every holiday, every Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever, we would send you a little personal I would hand write you a card and say, it was so like, thank you so much for partnering with us this year. I hope you have a wonderful holiday new year. Here's a little gift. And I would either give you what was your favorite thing or give you something new to see if you liked it. So we were constantly creating and strengthening that relationship with buyers. And what would happen is that buyers would then leave, you know, like our buyer would leave Nordstrom and go to Saks and then bring her with us. I can't tell you how many times buyers, because we had that relationship, would go to other retail positions and then they would just bring us on, to the point where I don't even remember ever actually going out to a national retailer and asking them to review a product. We had just created such strong relationships that it just was able to withstand our growth was because of those relationships. So
That's
I would
amazing.
say it was business development and also the way that we told a brand story. I mean, I would literally sit in the trade show booth and be like, I was a VP in entertainment and I was so burnt out that I bought a one-way ticket and I needed like 3 years to unwind. Like it was insane. And then I found Ayurveda and I started making these products and I started meditating and I started just focusing on what made me happy. And I was able to transform my life and I'm so much happier, healthier, self-aware than I was before. And you would just see these buyers' faces and they would be like, oh my God, I want to quit my job and travel the world. Like the way we told the story, the way that we sort of
Yeah,
brought people into this world was what worked well for us. And so we just kept doing that. And I think that is really that and the fact that obviously I had to pay attention to the money, but that is really what allowed us to grow so quickly.
amazing, amazing. All right, so you did mention the money there, so I'm gonna kind of tap into that point. There's loads of different directions I want to go in, so I'm hoping to kind of remember everything here because there's so much to dive into. The money side. So mentioned in your intro that you successfully raised $18 million. That was across kind of pre-seed to Series A, VC funding. What I mean, no founder, no entrepreneur goes into business to raise investment, right? Like it's part of the job. It's one of the worst parts of the job. What would you say from you're trying to summarize all these wonderful experiences that you've had? What would be kind of one of the biggest red flags that you would want to relay now in this interview to watch out for in that fundraising process?
I think, running an agency the last, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years, a lot of what I've seen is, early stage founders are like, I just need cash. And I get it, right? Every business needs cash for breakfast. Like everybody needs cash. But what I realized is that people really, early founders and a lot of founders, but especially early founders, don't realize that capital needs a strategy, just like marketing needs a strategy, just like branding needs a strategy, like inventory needs a strategy, or whatever your business is. Like capital also needs a strategy. It's not just, you should go after capital the same way that you think about doing anything else strategically in your business. And I think that sometimes that piece is missing. I think sometimes founders aren't really thinking about a capital strategy. They're thinking capital is a strategy, but
Money.
right, but capital needs a strategy, right? Your capital strategy is basically, why you're raising money, when you're raising money, and who you're raising money from. And I think whenever somebody comes to me through, either a friend or a referral and they say, I want to raise money, I just ask them those three questions. Like, why are you raising money? When do you want to raise it? And who are you thinking you're going to raise it from? And a lot of times people can't get past the why. Like
Mm.
they don't know really when. They're like, oh, well, now because they don't have money. And it's like, well, that's not a capital strategy, right? That's just you needing money. And when you get to the who, almost every single brand I've ever talked to is like, oh, I'm going to raise from venture capital. But I'll tell you, venture capital is not the best route for everybody to raise money. Venture capital doesn't belong in a lot of businesses. And so I think sometimes there's a disconnect between the opportunities for where you can raise money. And I think everybody's default is I'm going to raise from venture.
Mm.
But there are so many other avenues for capital, especially depending on the kind of business that you have. And I think that founders are too early to try to just like give away all of their equity to get as much money as they can instead of thinking
Yeah.
strategically about why do I need this money, when do I need it, and where can I get it.
Yeah. So I always love to go specific with these things like that. That's great. Makes a ton of sense. Has there ever been a specific instance that's kind of surprised you? Like, have you dealt with anyone that so for example, like wanted to secure capital for a reason other than just needing the money?
Well, I mean, I think everybody that I know that raised capital raised it, everybody that I helped raise capital raised it for a very specific reason, right? Not just because they needed money, but because maybe they are, they're already out and they like, let's say, I'll give my example. Like I raised money because I had a really large PO from Lululemon and I didn't think I had the capital to be able to go fill that and then cover everything else. Like that was a very specific reason why I was raising money. I had a brand that was raising money because they were a med tech device. And even though they'd already gotten a grant from the government and built it and tested it, they just needed a certain amount of money to be able to build out the actual mechanics of it. That made a lot of sense of why you would raise money. And that's something that is interesting for like a VC, right? So there's different kinds of businesses that should be raising in different ways. And I would say that what surprises me is when people are like, "Oh, I raised all this money," and then they didn't raise it with capital strategy. And I'm like, "How did you get somebody to give you that money? And you didn't actually, you were just like, oh, we have a SaaS company, like give us $5 million." So I think that in my experience, the companies that I've helped have been very specific and strategic about why they're raising the money and what it's for. It's usually at a specific inflection point, and it's never because they need money. Like if you go to somebody and say, "Give me money because I need money," like I'm not going to give you money. Like you have to have a reason of why you're asking for, $500,000, $200,000, or $1 million, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially early on because you don't probably have the customers, the revenue, and XYZ at a scale yet where it's obvious why somebody in venture would give you money.
Yeah, yeah, makes a ton of sense. So, really kind of looking through that growth lens, you need a strategy for capital, for fundraising in the same way you would for marketing sales. I love how you phrase that. Most of the time, if not all the time, that fundraising that you need to secure is in order to enable like some form of growth. So I just kind of wanted to shift that conversation back to growth. With your own business made by Yoke, the focus was very much on the buyers, those relationships, the business development. It was, B2B, selling into those retailers. Now with Holistic Design Group, you work across verticals, you work with brands across different sectors. Are there any other growth strategies that you've seen that has worked for different sorts of businesses beyond your own experience with Made by Yoke?
I would say, the way that I grew my business so backwards is probably not something that I've really been able to translate into a lot of other businesses. Like I've helped other companies who have already been selling direct to consumer with retail readiness who want to go into wholesale. But I would say the majority of my clients are not at all. There are a lot of CPG businesses that are just trying to get, how do I get someone's attention to get somebody on my website to buy my products or services? And so the way that I approach growth is really from sort of looking at sort of five key areas, I would say, or maybe it's six, but definitely these five areas. Like it's definitely having a specific goal, because I think sometimes what happens when you just need money early on is that you're not really sure what the goal is. Like just getting customers isn't a goal. If you want to, let's say you bought 1,000 units of a beauty product and you want to sell 1,000 units in the next 6 months. Okay, that's the goal that we can work towards. You've got a specific tangible goal that we're going after. But you also have to look at what is the season of that business, right? Because do you have a product that's launched? Do you have a product that isn't launched? Is this the third product? Did you launch a product and then nobody bought it? Like, where is this business and its total season of timing? Because the way that you're going to operate with a company that's been around for 3 years and didn't sell product is very different than the way you're going to operate with the company that launched a product 3 months ago and isn't selling, right? They don't need the same strategy. Then you need to figure out who else in your marketplace is selling and selling well. And I mean, those are the basics, right? Understanding your competitors. But I think you want to really pay attention to what your competitor is doing so you can figure out how they're messaging their customer, what kind of promotions are they running, so that you can either do something very different to stand out or try to win in the way that they're winning and just put your own spin on it, right? And so these are like just basic things that you need to think about when you're thinking about a growth strategy. It's not so much once all of these answers are going to get you to the tactic, but a lot of times brands jump into tactics without these core strategic ideas behind them, right? So we're talking about, what is your objective? What is your season of business? Who is your customer? I would say, how are you currently talking to your customer and how are you currently messaging them? Because a lot of times I see brands with maybe like a really big audience, but they can't convert them. And a big reason they can't convert them is because they're not telling the right story or they're not having the right conversation. And so a lot of times you have to look at your messaging as well. And then the fifth thing that I always look at is like, what, as a founder, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses and what are your gaps? Because the founding team is not going to have all the knowledge that you're going to need to grow. But being very clear and self aware as a founder about what you're good at and what you're not good at is the difference between $100,000. And so I think that you have to be clear about your blind spots in order to grow. So for me, you need to have all these answers answered before we can figure out what the right tactic is. I can't tell you how many times founders are like, "Oh, I'm on social, or I'm on this channel, or I'm on that channel," and it's like they haven't even considered anything around season of business, anything around messaging, anything around all the things that they just talked about. They're just jumping into channels and then trying to grow, but you have to
Mm,
consider all of the other things as part of it
yeah.
to me.
That's amazing, Tamara. I'm wondering, part of me is wondering why that is, because I totally agree with you. I see the same from my vantage point as well. And I wonder whether I think it's a combination of it's just what we all see on the outside before we
Yeah.
go into, we see someone's on social, I'll get on social. And B, I think when it is your own business, there is that itch that you just have to scratch and you want to feel busy, you want to feel like you're doing something.
Yeah.
But taking that time to sharpen the axe before you go into execution mode is so valuable. And I just love, love, love how much you phrased knowing the difference between your strengths and your weaknesses as a founder is the difference between $100,000. Like it literally is. So I want to underscore that for our audience here as well, because if you're going to hire someone, or as soon as you have got that funding to start scaling out that team, that's a lumpy salary that really forces your thinking to, really consider those things properly. So
Yeah.
before we continue, I think that was just such valuable piece of information there. I feel like there was that pentagram, those like 5 key things. So I would invite our listeners to just take a second, grab a piece of paper, and I want to recap this with you, Tamara, here very briefly, and get all of you to do this for yourself. So number 1 was your goal, right?
Yeah.
So have a specific smart, not just get more customers, but how many more units do you need to produce to fulfill for this order? Okay. Secondly, Tamara.
Yeah. Season of business. So like where are you? Like have you already tried to sell and you didn't sell? Are you going out for the first time? Is this your first product launch? Because your tactics are going to be tied to the season of your business.
Okay. And I guess that also focuses the mind on blockers, I'd imagine. Like, what are your main bottlenecks? What are your main blockers depending on where you're at? So we've
Yeah.
got what's your main goal, everyone, your specific goal. What stage are you at with your business? What season? Could you give us a few labels on that one, Tamara, like to help people categorize the
Like,
seasons?
are you still like product launch? Like, are you about to launch? Are you trying to sell products to a new audience? So sometimes we're changing audiences, right? Or we refined our customer, right? So now we're going and talking to a new customer. So that might be a different season. It could be I already sell one product, I'm trying to sell now another product or a product that's going to be complementary or a service that is complementary to a service that I'm providing. So it could be like audience based, it could be service or product based, it could be timing based, it could be complementary based. Does that help?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope the founders who are listening in, I hope that that helps you. Absolutely. And then third, so we've got goal, season, third one, Tamara.
Your market landscape. So basically, what sandbox are you playing in and who's there with you? So that's everything from understanding your competitors, how your competitors are talking to your customers, what your competitors are doing, what channels are your competitors using, what do you perceive that they're doing well? Because it's basically everybody else that your customer is exposed to.
Hmm.
And so it's really important to be very clear about what the value is that they provide so you can either differentiate the value that you're driving or figure out how to add on top of that.
Amazing. So what's your competitive edge? And the only way you can identify your competitive edge is by having a deep understanding about your competitors. So we've got goal, season, competition. Number 4.
customer. So whether it's customer conversations, whether it's you have customer conversations before you produce and launch or after you've launched. And I think customer understand there's always insights. You always have insights about what your customer thinks about what you're doing. And I think that the other flip side of the customer is getting really clear about how you're communicating to them, because sometimes the customer piece is, oh, I have all these insights, but it breaks down in your messaging. And so you're not actually saying the right thing. You're not clear in the value that you provide. You're not having that like interpersonal conversation where they want to get to know you. You know, your customer has to like you and your product. And so if they are reading your copy and they're like, oh, whatever, this is a clean beauty, it's vegan. Every beauty product is clean and vegan. That's not enough, right? So you have to look at how to have a deeper conversation with your
Amazing. And then last but not least, number 5.
It's basically self-awareness as a founder. What are you good at? What are you bad at? What's your blind spot?
I love that. I love that. Tamara, if you don't already have this, I feel like you could create a branded template that you could give everyone as like a worksheet, and you can have it in that pentagram shape of your the 5 core components of your strategy before moving into your growth tactics. I love that. I mean, I have loads more questions I would love to ask you, Tamara, but I'm aware that the chat has been on fire. Everyone, please take this as your prompt. If you don't already have a question for Tamara, please pop that in the chat. I'm going to ask you one last question from me before we go over to the audience Q&A, Tamara, which is, in your experience, you mentioned season, which season are you in? I would imagine pretty much everyone on this call at least is very early stages, pre-launch in the program. What's one of the top mistakes that you see early pre-launch founders make in those early days? Or
I,
what's the one top tip you could give them to like grow the business?
I think it's I think the hardest thing that new founders have is communicating the clarity around what they're delivering. I see a lot of I think sometimes when you're a founder, like in your head, you're like, oh yeah, this is what I do. It makes total sense to me. But that doesn't always translate to the customer. So I think a lot of times messages get confused or like the most important part is missing. And so I think that taking the time to really think about, if you're the customer, not the person who knows all the ins and outs, what do you need to know to decide that I like you enough to give you my money, right? Like it's kind of like sometimes we try so hard to be like so specific and thorough and precise that we forget to just be like human, right? Like we forget to just be like, this is the person who might want to buy my product. Like, and so, but we're so busy, like, okay, so here are all the facts about what I do and how I do it and what's in it and how it works. But we sort of get lost in details, and as a result we don't end up having like a real conversation with the customer. And I see
Yeah.
a lot of confusion sometimes in the messages that early founders, especially like on landing pages, are delivering to their
Yeah, that's hilarious, Tara. And it's so refreshing to actually, I think you may be one of the first, if not the first founder I've heard say that doesn't come like from that beauty angle, because you often see it on the very techie side of things, the technical
Yeah.
founders,
You see
but
it on
like
TV all day long. It's like if I
yeah.
see a beauty product that is like vegan, made with natural ingredients, the star herb of the month or whatever that makes your skin glowy, it's like that's not enough. That's the barrier of entry. Like that's not enough to get people to buy your product. And so I say that lovingly, right? Like there has to be, you have to have a deeper conversation with
I love that. I love that. And I think part of that as well is maybe kind of proactively carving out that time and space to take a step back from the business to work on the business, not in the business. All right, I'm going to come over to the questions. Tamara, thank you so much. So much gold in that. I could definitely go on, but I want to give the audience a chance to feel heard as well. So from fellow mentor, actually, Gabby Rooney, familiar name, she's asking, which trade shows did you go to in those early days, Tamara?
I went to New York Now. That was
Okay.
probably the top trade show.
Is that still
That's
around?
where like the biggest buyers were. I think now there's other ones. I mean, New York Now is definitely like it's at the Javits Center and it's the gift show. And so like Everybody who's selling gift is there. But there's also Shop Object is really good. It's actually Shop Object, I think, is less expensive, and it caters towards new brands that are more like kind of like I was in the beginning, where I was like sort of like a maker. And so I think if you're a smaller brand, I would look at Shop Object, which is also in here.
Nice. Thanks for those tips. I love that. From Joseph L. Draper, did your customers ask for your brand and that's how you were introduced to the other retail stores?
So I met the retail stores at the trade shows. And that was basically how I was introduced to that customer. So I went to 4 trade shows a year for probably the first 4 or 5 years. So
Mm,
that was the main marketplace for me to meet my customer. And so I invested all of my marketing budget into those trade shows. And
interesting.
that's basically I basically just met them where they were. So I think like for any B2B, one of the easiest ways is even if you're just investing that initial show, because they are quite expensive. Like I'm not going to pretend that they're not. It is an investment, right? But I think getting in front of your customer as much as you can in an environment in which the exchange of sales is the purpose of the environment is only going to help you. And that's how I did it.
I love that. And just before we move on, like the way I'm interpreting Joseph, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of that question, I think when he's saying customers, I'm sort of interpreting that as like the end user. I think
Yeah.
it's like, did you get that like the customer in the stores
Oh,
after
oh
your
yeah.
brand to like drive that demand? Did that
Yeah,
happen as
so
well?
what happened was that yes, so the way that most of the customers found us is because they bought us originally in a retail store. And
Yeah.
so like we didn't even turn on marketing for the website until 3 or 4 years in. And so what would
Interesting.
happen is like we would get emails like, "Oh, I bought this at Nordstrom, but they're sold out." And so now they're buying from us. And so we were able to then like absorb the customers that we got from the retailers. Basically the
Oh,
retailers were the introduction and then we got the customers out.
amazing. Thanks for that question, Joseph. I hope that answered that. From Chris, he says, "Hi Tamara, great story. You do indeed have a great story, Tamara. How did you manage life expenses when you spent 3.5 years learning the art to make your current products?"
God, I basically took my life savings and I put it into this business. And
Love it.
so I didn't have to work while I was doing it. I basically was living off of like very, very little. I would say the first year and a half to 2 years was really just like I reinvested everything that I made back into the business. So I wasn't like taking some nice salary. I was like, okay, we made money, put it back in, made money, put it back in. And so the very, very early days were really me investing in the business and then me reinvesting the revenue from the company into the business. And it wasn't until year 4 that I even thought about getting money, outside money from somebody else.
Yeah, amazing. Love that. Um, Guys, we've got such high levels of engagement today. So many more questions. All right, let's see how many more we can get through before we run out of time. One from Sydney. Again, welcome, Sydney. We really hope you've enjoyed this. Is your first session, so I hope you enjoyed this chat. This was quite a long one, so I'm going to basically summarize her long message here, which is around challenges as both as a woman and a founder of Color, Tamara. So thank you for bringing that one up, Sydney. She's a lot of questions in here, but essentially, like, what were your key challenges? And I guess, like, especially when it does relate to fundraising, like, that's where more of that bias can come in. It's a very male dominated field. Is there anything you can
Yeah.
speak to on that, Tamara?
Yeah. I mean, I think what is it like 2% of VC money goes to women and like 0.1 goes to women of color.
Yeah,
Something.
yeah,
But here's what I would say. I mean, a solid business is a solid business, right? Like if your business is making money and somebody can make money off of your business, then that's really all that fundamentally matters. And I would say that when I went after money, it was because I was already making money. And that's when you sort of get to the like, why are you raising money, right? So when I was raising money, I was like, Lululemon wants to give me a PO for 25,000 units. You know, like you can have whatever bias you want all day long, but I'm just told you a national retailer. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I don't want to dismiss it and say, oh, it's not hard being a woman of color raising capital, but again, going back to the why and when I was raising money, it was clear that there was a path for that money to come back. It was clear that other people that I didn't know saw so much value in the business that I was able to get into this many doors. And so I think that anytime you just lean on the facts, and that's why the strategy of when you're raising money is so important. I think that people always lose that. And I think that walking in the door knowing that people are going to have the biases, they're going to have a bias. But if you have a good product, you have a good service, you're a great founder, and you know that that money is going to make the money, then lean on that. So you shouldn't walk in the door ever feeling like where you're coming from is somehow, even though it is only 2% or 1%, is somehow less than, right? You just walk in and you own what you have. And the
Yeah.
right people are going to find you, are going to resonate with you, and they're going to give you money.
Yeah. Sydney, amazing question. Thank you so much for that one. I definitely could do at least a 2-hour chat about just that topic entirely. So I'm going to try and not open up such a can of worms, but
Women raise money because of this. Because of this, right? It is fundamentally harder. But sometimes when things are harder, I feel like your facts become stronger, and then you are actually you differentiate yourself with in a better way because you have even more facts because you know what you're up against. And so,
yeah, you
yeah.
we won't go too far down this down this slippery path, but what I'm taking away is two main things from that. One is, you know, the facts don't have the bias, right? Like if you've got the traction, if you've got the orders, it's pure business. You can take all of that out of the equation, present the numbers. Like every investor has a
Yeah.
bias towards an ROI. What it does make me wonder though, Tamara, and we won't go down this route, but I
Yeah.
think it's much more challenging at that, pre-seed, round, especially if it's like a tech business where you can't rely as much on the facts, on the balance sheets to kind of back that up. But anyway, as I said, I'm going to try and bite my
Oh
tongue
yeah,
on
I could totally get into this with you, but
maybe.
we'll move on.
There's a, we'll move on.
It's so
There'll be, if you guys want a part two, if you would like us to deep dive on that topic, then we are both totally up for it. But I
Yeah.
just try and get to last two questions, and then we've got our quiz. Um, Thank you so much again, everyone, for your questions. Amit, he asks, what were your blind spots, and how long did it really take you to identify them?
It's so funny, I feel like I became I thought I was self-aware when I started this business, but I'm so much more self-aware today. Like who I am as a person, I'm so much more self-aware than I was like 14 years ago when I started this. I think what I thought my blind spot was, I thought my blind spot was marketing. I thought like branding, marketing, like I don't really know how to do that. I was like a tech girl with a product development background. I knew operations was like the back of my head. So I thought that branding and marketing was my blind spot. And what I realized was that branding and marketing wasn't my blind spot. I was actually way better at branding and marketing than I was at anything else. And my blind spot was finance and not like raising money and not making money because I grew very slowly, intentionally, so that I was always profitable. But if I had had like a finance mastermind or even somebody who had a finance background who was like, approach product from this, look at your margins like this. Like if somebody said to me in year 4, you should be making money on shipping. And I was like, I didn't know I should be making money on shipping. If I had had somebody that told me that, I would have structured my shipping differently. I would have padded shipping with like 50 cents or a dollar more. Like there were just little things that I didn't realize I didn't know. And then when I actually got an actual like CFO in there, I was like, oh my God, I left so much money on the table.
You just
So
don't know what you don't know, though, right? And
I
this
didn't
is,
know. I didn't know,
yeah.
but I mean, but if somebody had been with me earlier who had had that experience, my margins would have been so much. I would have had way better margins earlier. Just things
And
like
this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing, right? So things like
that's
this, like you guys.
why I'm here because as a solo founder, I was like, I needed that strategic partner, and
Yeah,
I needed it in ways I didn't even know that I needed, right? And
yeah.
so I think that's what's so great about a program like this is that you
I'm
have access to all of this.
This program, these community events, my podcast, I have to shout out as well, obviously. But I think, what I hope you're all taking away from this is both the inspiration and the abstract, but also those specifics. Like, if any of you have a physical product business, like maybe put an extra 50 cents or a dollar on the shipping, like these specific practical things. Last question. Apologies, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Mukadas. How did you find the investors? That's quite a big one, but our last one for this evening, Tamara.
I had a couple of people who had reached out to me earlier on through friends of friends who were basically like institutional VCs. And I had those conversations and it just felt like it didn't feel right. Like I was like, oh, I don't want to raise money. Like this feels weird. Like you want 20% of my business and I just like slept on a cot for 3 years. It just didn't feel like the right fit. So I found my investors through my lawyer, who was a startup lawyer. And I basically said to him, like, hey, I'm thinking about like getting some money. This is where I am. Do you know anybody? And he basically like opened up his network to me. And that's how I found it. And I worked with him for about 4 years. Like he did all my startup paperwork. He was very involved in the startup community in LA. I was in like every startup community in LA that existed. I went to like all the events. So I became, it wasn't like somebody that I just went to randomly. Like I'd already had a relationship with him. Now he didn't give me any money, but through my relationship with him, he felt like he felt like he could open up to me to people that he knew were angel investors. And I didn't personally raise VC money. I got money from angels.
I love that. Thank you so much. So, but make friends with lawyers, guys. The questions.
Your startup ecosystem as wide as you can because you
Yeah.
never know where money comes from. You never know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Everyone, please let's continue the chat, please, in our community Slack channel. If you're not already in there, then tag myself or Samantha or Juan. We'll get you into that channel. Let's continue that conversation. I'm sure Tamara wouldn't mind popping in her LinkedIn profile if you want to connect and continue that. For now, quiz time. Let's see who has been paying attention to this wonderfully meaty conversation with Tamara. So, question number one, Tamara, biggest flag to watch out for in the fundraising process? What's the answer?
Raising money too early and from the wrong people.
Yeah, yeah. Being too eager to raise too early from the wrong sources, not having a
Yeah,
capital strategy.
not have a capital strategy.
Option A, hopefully everyone's got that one right. Next question, Tamara, what was the top thing that worked getting your brand into 25,000 retailers?
I mean, definitely relationship building the relationship with our customers who were the buyers. It really came down to that.
Fantastic. That is the correct answer. We hope you've all got that right. Who got 3 out of 3? Go for God. Tamara, it's been incredible. I definitely feel like we could do a part two. We've definitely got some appetite. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining me, everyone. We'll get you into the community Slack channel so we can keep the conversation going. But now, next time, please join me, same time, same place next week. I'll be interviewing Robert Manassia, one of the other One Day founders. Scan that QR code in the chat on the screen to make sure you register for that one. And I hope to see you all there again. In the meantime, thank you all so much. Tamara, thank you. This has been so, so interesting. I've really enjoyed our chat today.
Fun anytime. I love it.
Thank you so much, everyone. And Sydney will get you into the channel. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Hi guys.